I am Vexashara, once a fleet commander of the Krillian Dominion, and I am writing this account because someone has to remember what really happened. Not the version the High Council tells in their reports, not the version painted on our monuments, the truth. Because I was there, and I watched an entire fleet learn a lesson that the rest of the galaxy had already learned the hard way, long before I was born. Let me start with the rule. Every species that flies among the stars knows it, even if they pretend they don't. It is not written into any treaty. No ambassador signed it. No council voted on it. It exists the way gravity exists, quietly, constantly, and without asking permission. The rule is simple, 4 words long, and every child in every empire hears it whispered at some point in their life. Never fight humanity. When I was young, I thought this was superstition, a story told to frighten cadets into obedience. My instructors would say it the way old sailors once spoke of sea monsters, with a strange mixture of fear and respect, as if the very topic might summon the thing itself. I did not understand it. Humanity, as far as I knew, was a small, young species from a single blue world, with fewer colonies than my own dominion had shipyards. They were not larger. They were not faster. Their ships were not more advanced. By every measure my education gave me, they should have been forgettable. They were not forgettable. I would learn why. There is a part of galactic history that most empires do not like to discuss. We call it, in hushed rooms, the First Contact Wars. 3 different empires over the span of 2 centuries decided that humanity was an opportunity rather than a warning. Each of them was larger, older, and more powerful than humanity's fledgling colonies. Each of them believed the encounter would be quick. None of those 3 empires exists today, not as they once did. Their territories were absorbed, their fleets scattered, their names reduced to footnotes in academies that no longer wished to explain what had gone wrong. I did not know the details. Almost no one does. Humanity does not brag. They do not build victory monuments on the ashes of their enemies. If anything, they seem almost uncomfortable when the topic comes up, the way a person might be uncomfortable discussing an old wound that never fully healed. That silence, I think now, is what made the rule so powerful. A threat you can see is something you can plan around. A threat that says nothing, asks for nothing, and simply exists at the edge of your maps. That is something else entirely. Fear grows best in silence. I served the Dominion faithfully for 11 cycles before the war that ended my old life. My rank was earned, not gifted. I fought pirates along the outer trade lanes, put down a rebellion on one of our mining moons, and rose through the ranks by making careful, disciplined decisions. I was proud of my record. I believed, as most officers did, that the Dominion's strength came from patience and precision. We did not rush into battles. We studied our enemies for years before striking, and by the time we struck, we already knew exactly how the fight would end. That confidence is what doomed us. 3 years before I lead the mission I am about to describe, the Dominion lost a long and costly war with the Thren Alliance over a resource-rich stretch of unclaimed space. It was not a war we chose gladly, but it was one we could not avoid, and it left us weakened. Our shipyards were stretched thin. Our treasury was drained. Our High Council, desperate to recover both territory and prestige, began looking for opportunities. Quiet ones that would not draw the attention of larger powers. That is when someone on the council remembered the humans. I want to be fair to my former superiors, though it is hard. They were not fools. They were frightened, proud people trying to hold together an empire that was quietly falling apart. When intelligence reports came in describing a small human agricultural colony on the edge of known space, a colony with minimal defenses according to our scouts, and far from any major human fleet, the temptation was too great to resist. The Council's reasoning, as it was explained to me in the briefing room, went like this. Humanity's core worlds were far away. Their main fleets, as far as our scouts could tell, were occupied elsewhere, dealing with a border dispute on the opposite side of their territory. If we moved quickly and quietly, we could take the colony, secure its resources, and present the Council with a strategic victory before humanity even noticed. No treaties would be broken in a way anyone could prove. No formal declaration of war would be necessary. It would look, on paper, like an unfortunate territorial dispute rather than an invasion. I remember sitting in that briefing room, listening to the plan, and feeling something cold settle into my chest. I asked, carefully, whether anyone had studied why the rule against fighting humanity existed in the first place. The officer briefing us, a proud, ambitious man named Doth Korin, waved the question away. He said the old wars were ancient history, fought by empires too arrogant and too slow to adapt. He said the Dominion was different, smarter, faster. He said we would strike, take what we needed, and be gone before humanity's fleet could even receive the distress call. I did not agree with him. But I was a soldier, and soldiers follow orders, even when their instincts scream otherwise. I have thought about that decision every day since. It is the heaviest weight I carry. We approached the colony world, a quiet green planet the humans called Aldergrove, with 16 warships under my command. 16 ships against what our scouts described as a farming settlement with no meaningful military presence. On paper, it was not even a battle. It was a formality. The moment we entered orbit, I felt the first crack in my confidence. There were no panic transmissions. No confused, disorganized defense. Instead, the colony's surface lit up with a calm, coordinated pattern of activity. Lights moving in straight lines, structures folding into the ground with mechanical precision, transport vehicles converging on specific points, as if following a plan they had rehearsed 100 times before. It did not look like a colony under attack. It looked like a colony executing a checklist. Within minutes, nearly the entire visible population had vanished from the surface, not fled in panic, vanished, in an orderly, practiced way, into shelters that our scans had somehow completely failed to detect beneath the soil. I remember staring at my display, watching thousands of life signs disappear from open ground and reappear, moments later, safely underground, and thinking, this is not what an undefended colony looks like. Doth Corin, standing beside me on the bridge, insisted this was simply an evacuation, nothing more. He ordered our ground forces to proceed with securing key colony structures, agricultural centers, communication relays, the small orbital shipyard the humans used for supply runs. I gave the order, because it was still, technically, my duty to do so. But my hands were unsteady in a way they had not been in 11 years of service. The ground operation should have taken hours. It became a slow, grinding series of small, precise setbacks. Our forces met automated defense drones, not large or heavily armed, but positioned with an accuracy that suggested someone had studied exactly where an invading force would need to go, and had prepared for that exact path months, maybe years in advance. Every route we took seemed to funnel us toward choke points. Every choke point seemed to buy the colony more time. Our forces were not being destroyed outright. They were being delayed, held, slowed, again and again, in a way that felt less like combat and more like being managed. I did not understand it yet, but I understand it now. Humanity does not build undefended colonies. Not really. What looks peaceful and open on the surface is, more often than not, a structure built with the assumption that someone, someday, might try exactly what we were trying. They plan for the worst case as a matter of habit, the way other species plan for good harvests. 6 hours into the operation, my sensor officer reported something that made the bridge go silent. A fleet had entered the system. I checked the numbers twice, certain there had been an error. Our intelligence had placed humanity's nearest major fleet more than 4 days away, occupied with an unrelated conflict on the far side of their territory. 4 days. And yet here they were, in a matter of hours, arriving not with an overwhelming force, but with exactly enough ships to do what needed to be done. I have thought many times about how that was possible. I do not know the full answer, even now. What I do know is this. Humanity treats distance and time as problems to be solved, not as limits to be respected. While the rest of us built fleets meant to look impressive, they built fleets meant to move. While we built armies meant to occupy, they built systems meant to respond. It is not a difference in strength. It is a difference in mindset, and it is the kind of difference that decides wars before the first weapon is ever fired. Their fleet was smaller than mine. I want to be honest about that, because it matters. This was not a story about overwhelming numbers crushing an outmatched force. It was something stranger, and in some ways more frightening. Their ships moved with a coordination that did not look rehearsed so much as instinctive, as if every captain in that fleet had already run this exact scenario in their mind 1,000 times, and simply needed to execute the plan they already knew. I ordered a defensive formation, hoping to hold position and negotiate a withdrawal. Doth Corin, to his credit, tried to open a communication channel, offering to leave the system peacefully in exchange for safe passage. There was a long pause before any response came. I remember hoping, in that pause, that this would end quietly, that the old stories were exaggerations, and calm words would be enough to close the door we had so carelessly opened. The response we received was brief. A single human officer's voice, calm and without anger, informed us that the offer to withdraw peacefully had already passed. It had passed the moment our ships entered orbit around an inhabited colony with weapons active. There would be no negotiation for retreat. There would only be a demonstration, so that our Dominion would never again mistake caution for weakness. I did not fully understand what that meant until the fighting began. I will not describe every detail of what followed, because some of it is not mine to describe, and because dwelling too long on the specifics would serve no purpose beyond causing pain. What I will say is this: it was fast, and it was precise, and it was, above all, deliberate. There was no wasted movement. No unnecessary risk. Every maneuver the human fleet made seemed to close off another one of our options before we had even considered it. Ships that tried to retreat found their paths already anticipated. Ships that tried to regroup found themselves cut off from support before the order could even be given. It was not cruelty. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to tell this story as a tale of monsters, and that would be a lie. It was control. Total, complete control of the battlefield, applied with just enough force to end the fight, and not one measure more. I have served under officers who believed that overwhelming force was the mark of strength. That day, I learned that restraint, applied with total precision, can be far more unsettling than any show of overwhelming power. Within 2 hours, more than half of my fleet was disabled or destroyed. Not 2 hours of careless chaos, 2 hours in which every human ship seemed to know exactly where to be before it needed to be there. I gave the order to retreat what remained of our forces, and for the first time in my career, I felt something close to true fear. Not of the human weapons. Of the fact that they had clearly expected this exact situation, and had already decided how it would end, long before we arrived. My own flagship was disabled during the final stage of the engagement, not destroyed, disabled. Its weapon systems were cut off with careful precision, leaving the ship intact but powerless. I remember standing on my bridge surrounded by warning lights and the sound of my crew trying, uselessly, to restore power to systems that had been shut down with surgical accuracy. I expected, in that moment, that we would be destroyed along with the rest of the fleet. I had, after all, led an invasion of an inhabited world. I would not have blamed them. Instead, a single human shuttle docked with my ship. The officer who came aboard was unremarkable to look at. No ceremonial armor, no dramatic entrance, nothing that suggested triumph or superiority. She introduced herself simply as Fleet Commander Reyes, and she asked, calmly, to speak with whoever was in command. I stepped forward. I expected judgment. I expected anger. What I received instead was something far more difficult to carry. She told me, in a quiet, steady voice, that her fleet had not come to conquer the Dominion, or to punish it, or to claim territory of its own. She said humanity had learned, generations ago, at a terrible cost, exactly what happens when they hesitate to respond decisively to an invasion. She said the wars that shaped that lesson were not something humanity was proud of. They were something humanity had never wanted to repeat. She explained, in words I still remember clearly, that the rule against fighting humanity was never meant as a threat. It was meant as a mercy, a single, quiet warning extended to every species in the galaxy, so that none of them would ever have to learn the lesson the way humanity's ancestors once did. The rule existed so that empires like mine would never have to lose a fleet, or a colony, or a future, simply because no one had bothered to explain the stakes in advance. I asked her, because I needed to understand, why my ship had been spared when so much of my fleet had not. She said it plainly, because someone needed to survive this and carry the truth home. Not a story of humanity's cruelty, which would only breed resentment and future conflict. The truth of what had actually happened, those precise, undeniable stakes, so that my Dominion, and any other power watching from a distance, would understand exactly why the rule existed, and would choose, next time, to respect it before the first weapon was ever fired. I asked her one more question. I asked if humanity ever regretted the reputation that had grown around them, the whispered warnings, the fear in every academy, the way entire fleets hesitated at the mere mention of their name. She was quiet for a moment before answering, and she said humanity never wanted to be feared. They had simply refused, after everything their ancestors endured, to ever again be caught unprepared. If that refusal looked like strength to the rest of the galaxy, so be it. But it had never been born from pride. It had been born from loss, and from a promise made by people who never wanted their descendants to bury as many of their own as they once had to. I did not know what to say to that. I still do not. Fully, even now. They released the remainder of my fleet 3 days later, after confirming that Aldergrove's colonists were safe, and that no lasting occupation had been established. They did not demand reparations. They did not demand an apology broadcast across every channel in Dominion space. the way I might have expected from a conquering power eager to humiliate a defeated enemy. They asked for exactly one thing, that my report to the High Council be honest, not softened, not adjusted to protect anyone's pride, honest. I gave them that honesty, and it cost me my career. The Council did not want to hear that a smaller human fleet had dismantled our attack in a matter of hours. They did not want to hear that our best intelligence on human fleet movements had been wrong by a matter of days, not weeks. They did not want to hear that the undefended colony we were told to expect had in fact been built from the ground up with exactly this scenario in mind. It was easier, for men like Doth Corin, to call it bad luck, an unfortunate miscalculation, a mission that could have succeeded with better planning next time. I told them there would be no next time worth planning for. I told them the rule was not a myth, or an exaggeration, or a story meant to frighten cadets. It was the single most honest warning the galaxy had ever been given, and we had ignored it out of pride and desperation, and paid for that mistake with ships and lives that did not need to be lost. They did not want to hear it. I was quietly removed from active command shortly after, my record marked with vague language about questionable judgment during a sensitive operation. I do not regret what I said. I only regret that it took losing so much for me to understand it. I think about Aldergrove often now, from this scrapyard where I spend my days cataloging the wreckage of ships that once served under my command. Some of them sit here still, scorched and silent, waiting to be broken down for parts. I walk among them sometimes, and I remember standing on the bridge of my flagship, watching a fight I never should have started slip entirely out of my control within hours. I have heard, through old contacts who still speak to me despite my fall from favor, that certain members of the High Council still whisper about acceptable exceptions to the rule, smaller operations, careful provocations, kept just below whatever threshold might draw humanity's full attention. They believe, even now, that the lesson of Aldergrove was a matter of poor timing, rather than a fundamental truth about the species we chose to provoke. I do not believe they are right, and I fear what it will cost the next commander who is ordered to prove it. If you are reading this account from another empire, another fleet, another quiet council room debating whether an old rule still applies to your own ambitions, I ask you to consider what I did not consider, in the confidence of my 11 years of service. Consider that a rule which has survived every empire's attempt to test it might not be a story at all. It might simply be the truth, spoken plainly, by a species that has already paid its price for learning that truth once, and has no wish to charge anyone else the same fee twice. They will learn, those who still doubt it. They always do, eventually. The only real question left to answer is how many ships, how many colonies, and how many futures must be spent proving what one simple rule was already offering, freely, to anyone patient enough to listen. I chose not to listen, once. I will carry that choice for the rest of my life. I hope, for the sake of whoever reads this next, that you choose differently.